Stepping away from the birth certificate system and creating a system of meritocracy was the way I found to break the chains and the ties of usury and participation with a system that I did not agree to when I was born.
Why is it important for governments, tribes, nations to even have a flag, and where did this construct begin?
From my investigation, the system that the world has been set up on has been that of a feudal system. And so as entities begin warring against entities, and as entities begin shipping themselves throughout the world, across the oceans and through the seas, they would put banners up. And banners were the symbol of who was coming to your location or who was on the battlefield. So it came from a concept of feudalism. That concept carried over as ships would make it to other destinations. It would be the manifest of the terms of who was coming to conduct business. And so as commissions were paid for ventures and voyages for ships to go across oceans and go across seas, the commission would have what they call goods aboard the vessel, otherwise known as a manifest. And that manifest, as they would go from port to port, location to location, would be the terms of goods to negotiate trade amongst societies, amongst clans. From the native culture, it was not so much banners and flags, it was more symbolisms built around spiritual ideologies.
I see.
So that translated to the native community when the natives worldwide were tricked by a genocide of an agenda to capture their lands, to capture their people. It was conveyed, and they were given and told about the flag etiquette, which was a crime against those native people on a worldwide level. The main culprits for that was the Vatican and the Jesuit Society of Missionaries, who would go from tribal state to tribal state on a global level, learn about their concepts, and direct them into this concept of flag etiquette. Oh, they would first carry their flag for their Jesuit order or their Vatican, and that's how that kind of got carried over into the native position. However, from a feudal position, when the sheiks of the Middle East or the monarchs of England and the feudal system, they would have banners to represent who was fighting where, direct columns. This was a feudal concept of flag etiquette. So the flag protocols came from a feudalistic position to give closure on communication of voyages and battlefield positions.
Technically positions. So if you were Christopher Columbus coming over to America in the day, or any of those, even the Spanish Armada, you're coming over, you landed here on these shores, but there is no nation technically set up with a flag. How does that translate? What happens at that point?
They were under the Spanish Armada flags. And so they were in a position where they were under someone else's colors. And those colors would represent the terms of how they were going to conduct business when they got here. And so they were a front runner, like a broker, for those who funded the voyage.
So when they came upon a land where there were no flags, how does one then bridge that gap and interpret that? So the Indians didn't have a flag, these people arrive, here's a flag, now what?
They were tricked in thinking that this flag meant something of protocol. And then as the flag the greed of man came into place and they started taking from the native peoples on a worldwide level. You know, slavery is not a new thing, right? Blacks captured blacks, natives captured natives, whites captured whites. It was all feudalism for servitude at that time to get tasks done, to get jobs done. And so the slavery is not just a white ideology, but is a cultural ideology, a feudalistic state on a global level. And it's been happening since the beginning of time.
So when they came in and they would set their position with a flag on the shores where there was no flag, what would it be, a takeover, a hostile takeover at that point?
There would be a hostile takeover, and then behind that, they would use the favorite phraseology of the bad guys, or the bad people running the planet, might makes right. So it had no position of correctness, per se, because they couldn't capture a sovereign land. However, they could trick them, put their flag down and say, these are our terms now that our flag has shown up, which is unfair to the unsuspecting and uneducated cultural differences between societies. So the flag is one position of symbols, as a symbolic state of the government or the corporation that's behind the flag. The flag standard has been changed throughout the years. The flag standard sets the terms of what the meaning of that flag is, changes venues. So when countries come together to negotiate peace and treaty, they have the ball on top of the flag standard. The ball on top of the flag standard is closure that there's a recruitment on contract, that there's a drafting for that contract, we're open for business and we're going to set up terms, and these are the terms that
you'll negotiate at that point.
You're going to negotiate at that point.
Yeah.
Now, with the wings up on the eagle that's on the flag standards, or the bird that's on the flag standards, that is a postal position. Wings down on the bird is a Vatican position, and the spire is a martial law position. In all countries worldwide at the United Nations, when you walk into the embassy, on top of their flag standard is the spire. In governor's offices, as well as prime minister's offices worldwide, the spire is on top. The spire, during times of war, contract is suspended, which means it's the commander-in-chief's will that dictates the terms in the theater. The commander-in-chief's will, he holds the palm of justice in the palm of his hand. And he wields the flag because during times of war theater, the civil servant sector, such as our representatives, our senators, our governors, are all suspended. Their job titles are suspended, as well as state statutes, civil codes, and municipal codes are no longer valid during wartime functions of flag etiquette. And so in the former United States, this is why we see the spire on top of the state flags when you go into a governor's office, because the state constitutions are suspended. Because under the Maritime Commerce Acts of Title 46, the states were supposed to publish commerce and their own money by the year 2001, when the United States government ceased to exist in 1999. Since they did not publish their own commerce, there's no such thing as a state national. There's no such thing as state sovereignty anymore. That was done out the door under knowledge and negligence by the public officials who did not reconstitute their state constitutions by the year 2001, nor did they reconstitute their state governments in 2001, nor did they reconstitute their money. And every state should have coined their own financial system and minted their own terms of finance for their state financial duties.
Where does that leave us with all new flags, such as the Obama flag and the Space Force flag?
Sure. So flags globally were recorded at the International Bureau of Weights and Measures in France, which means every country would file their flag etiquette closure with that corporation to be under the umbrella of the International Maritime Organization out of London. However, in 2004, I challenged the International Bureau of Weights and Measures on the charter that allowed them to function as a corporate entity. And I found that the words on paper for their charters was 100% fraud, which means they were using adverbs, adjectives, and pronouns and had no facts for the statement of a claim. This was a violation of Title 18, 1001 for fictitious grammar. And I called them on the carpet, so the flags now would be registered with the quantum banking system and me, because they don't have the authorization to take a flag anymore. The Obama flag is not registered anywhere on the planet. It is a 2x5 flag with a yellow fringe on it, which has no standing anywhere on the planet. So this is a fake flag. Space Force as well, created by a fake president, Donald Trump, has no authorization or jurisdiction anywhere as well, because the position of president in the United States ended in 1999. Therefore, anything after the year 1999, this is a false ruse placed under the FEMA, Federal Emergency War Powers Act, because there is no continental government anymore, because the United States ceased to exist when they came out of their third and final bankruptcy. The bankruptcy started on July 1st, 1775. Benjamin Franklin, who was a French attorney as well as a British, English barrister, was working surveying lands for Canada and throughout the eastern seaboard of the northern continental United States. Benjamin Franklin was a postmaster. I personally have looked in his books, and he canceled his stamps. He put stamps on his bank contracts. He placed his signature simulation across the stamps with those who also borrowed and lent him the money. So the answer to the question is yes, he was a postmaster, which means he was navigating bills of the lading as a freight forwarder. He was also the Postmaster-General, which means he was in charge of the postal control for setting up the sea lanes for commerce for the continental United States. And he was a double Postmaster General, both in Canada and the continental colonies simultaneously. So he was functioning in two positions.
How could he technically be in two different positions simultaneously?
Well, the education at the time for a Postmaster General position was very limited in scope, and he was trained by the monarchies that were in power at the time to be that person. So it came down to knowledge. The first rule of a Postmaster General is you have to have knowledge, and he was also what they were doing, maintaining the rules of the continuance of the evidences with their joinder for freight to come on and off our shores.
But does that include North America as a whole at that point, as a territory, or was it divided?
It was divided based upon the survey lines that they were getting themselves into. When the United States government sent Lewis and Clark on their traitorous trail across the continental United States to capture and survey the lands, then they tried to encompass all, because the first rule of contract is closure. They didn't have any knowledge of what was out there. So they hired the U.S. Army as a conquering state, because armies are conquering functions, not capturing functions. The capturing functions are sea-bearing and air-bearing, which is Marines and Navy and so forth. But when you actually occupy a land, that's when you bring in your armies on a worldwide level. Please comprehend that as Postmaster General of our world, not only do I control the United States military's order of operation of functions, but each military on planet Earth. One of the contracts that I have globally was at the Secretary of State's office at the Vatican. And they asked me, because of my knowledge of how postal mechanics work, how militaries are put into theater, both oceanic and land and space. I spent 3 days with them, and they concurred, because of my knowledge position, that I was Postmaster General not only of the former United States, but each army on planet Earth. Some of the questions that are posed to me as I meet with different entities on a global level is, are you the supreme sovereign ruler of each military on planet Earth? Well, I'm a sovereign commander of correctness and facts for militaries to stop wars, to aid the people on the planet, because militaries work for we the people. Unfortunately, the people have been asleep at the wheel, have not comprehended the dynamics of this meritocracy shipping war that's been placed against us from cradle to grave. So what I did was I figured that out, And I positioned myself based upon knowledge and first in line, first in time, which means nobody after I left could hire anyone else, right? Just because I wasn't there, you couldn't spin somebody up and say, oh yeah, Russell's not working here anymore, or not here, yeah, you can be in this position. That's not how this works. I did not leave them the authorization to do that. I took all their authorization away from them and brought it back into my now space so that I convey contract for the citizens, for the militaries in a peaceful manner, so that the flag can now set the terms for the performances that need to be done for we the people. And the people are figuring that out. I know it's a big pill to swallow because they're uneducated on global meritocracies of shipping. But if you break down the concept of how the birth certificate system was being used in our lives to be a tentacle of that meritocracy, you'll find that there's correctness in what I've done, there's correctness in what I've said, and I am this person who I say.
So how does that tie back in now with what you mentioned about Benjamin Franklin and his authorization to even represent the United States in any way, or the colonies in any way, since he basically contracted with France and England? How does that work?
Well, it was a trick against the Founding Fathers. And the trick was that he did not give them full closure that he was a traitor and he was working for two entities at the same time. But he was highly educated in the arts of linguistics at the time. He was fluent in the 7 arbitrary forms of ciphering, which he was a master of. So he knew how to italicize words. He knew how to italicize words in contract whenever are not spelled correct, which means anytime you see a word italicized in contract, it's actually a misspelled word.
So that voids the contract.
So it voids the contract altogether. So because you're breaking the rules of the continuance of evidence by placing it in a different space through the articulation of script.
And he knew this.
Yes, he was very skilled in this, and that's why he had a print press. And when you go to his print press in Philadelphia, all characters in his newspaper were italicized words, or italicized. I've physically been there. This is a true statement, and it's under the National Parks direction. That's who controls when you go there. You go through the national parks. It's actually a museum of a national historical position. In the Benjamin Franklin bank books themselves, at the Benjamin Franklin Post Office in Philadelphia, it has many different bank books of many different drafts. But when you tie in the rules of continuance of evidence to domestic bankruptcies, and domestic bankruptcies run 7 years, and international bankruptcies, which run 70 years, you will see what's called the rules of the continuance of the facts, or the evidence. And how that ties into Benjamin Franklin now is he borrowed 1.6 million francs on July 1st, 1775. Nothing becomes law for 1 year, 1 day, and there's 3-day rescission, which will take you to July 4th, 1776. But he had already filed and borrowed 1.6 million francs from France and filed a domestic bankruptcy with France, which means they've agreed he could pay back the money within 7 years if he could get it done. That took us to 1782. In 1782, he filed another domestic bankruptcy for 7 years because he was still in charge of his ledger of borrowing the money, which took you to 1789.
Was he solely in charge of that?
He was solely in charge, and he was the only one on bank draft with the Founding Fathers witnessing signing off on it on July 4th, 1776. So they were setting up the terms on which the bankruptcy was to be conducted. And so
you're saying that they were aware of this as well?
Some, yes. Don't know their knowledge basis because I wasn't there. But they were a debtor at that point in 1776. So my question to the general public is, how can a debtor set terms for we the people? This was a fraud against we the people. This was a big farce designed to keep other powers in control of our country, where the whole volition of the settlers who came across and the colonists who came across was to break ties from those countries and those monarchies that were oppressing them back on another continent. They felt like they could come to this continent and move everybody out of the way fraudulently through what's called ailing, which is fraudulent contract, conveying fraudulent contract against the native people that were here, capture them, capture their lands, and give them a whole new paradigm of thinking through grammar and faith concepts. Because the colonists knew, and the financiers behind them knew, that they had to change the thinking, and they do that through our vocabulary, through our phonics, through our phonetics. This creates our world, right, through the grammar. And they trick the natives out of the spoken word and the tonations and the harmonics and the peace and love with that, and they tied them to a commercial tool saying, you need to have an alphabet to write your words down, you need to have a flag, you need to set up, and they moved them into a corporate meritocracy, which was unfair to the native people, at the same time creating a mass genocide. If you didn't believe like the white people, then we would kill you. So it was a double-edged sword of ailing to capture this country, put on by the monarchies from the European states.
So Russell, you are the owner and the copyright holder of the Title IV flag. What's the distinction between being the owner and a copyright holder of any flag?
Yes. So the Title IV 1 to 1.9 dimension flags, Title IV Section 1, 2, and 3, the grammar for claiming the flag was written in modification language, which means they were using adjectives and adverbs to create verbs and pronouns. There were no facts in that statement.
Who were they?
The government styles manual for printing office under the U.S. codes.
So back in the day when the U.S. flag was actually created, is that what you're referring to?
Correct. The grammar that they used was done in a modification state where there were no facts on the page. We saw the United States government was coming out of bankruptcy because we had access to the books.
You mean you and David Wynn Miller?
David Wincombe Miller, yes.
Your partner.
My partner at the time, yeah. We were cognizant that it was that we had to do something, right? Well, the first rule of contract when you go to a port or a bank or open up any business on a global level is flag etiquette. So we started studying up and brushing up on how to use the flag. And we wrote the copyrights to the flag in quantum grammar, but we filed it at the Post Office of the United Nations to be bearers and owners of the flag. Because the Patent Office, we knew that the United States government was going to have to vacate the estate, which means that the United States Postal Service and the United States Post Office couldn't authorize any functions underneath it, which means it couldn't authorize the U.S. Patent Office, because it was going to be a closed entity because the post office was shutting down.
In 1999.
In 1999. When we took their flag away from them, that was the certification that they couldn't grab the flag and go back in and reset up terms. So we took it away from the shareholders of the federal contractors, the capacity to legally set up a corporate structure for business. So we had to file copyrights on that, and we filed that at the United Nations and published worldwide. It was accepted at the United Nations, and we were given our sovereignty status, not from them because they couldn't give us sovereignty status. Sovereigns claim their status, right? Because the United Nations was a fraudulent organization. It modifies their grammar as well. It has no standing in the now space. Later on in life, I would get those conversations with the heads of the United Nations. And to get back to your point, so as bearer of the flag and owner of the flag, if I choose to set up terms and accept terms, I can hoist the colors anywhere in the world, and I'm accepted to deal in business, to business transactions, as well as negotiate trade and peace on a global level.
Now, does anyone else recognize that?
Everywhere in the world.
So they all know this.
Yes.
And they knew it then. All countries of the world understood at that time when you took the flag.
Not at that time, not until we sat down with them at the United Nations. Then they became knowledgeable.
So you gave them what you call closure at that point in time
yes.
of the correct parse syntax grammar filing and why that's important.
Correct. We sat down typically 2 hours to 4 hours per meeting. You know, ambassadors are very busy in their day-to-day lives at the United Nations. But some ambassadors called us back as many as 20 times to specific countries to have a conversation specifically with me about the quantum banking system and the ramifications for corporate structure of meritocracy on wharfs, docks, and quays.
right? And so those were wonderful conversations. They asked a lot of technical stuff that was designed in there of me, and I gave them the necessary closure so that they could pass that closure on to their Treasury departments.
Now, when you actually took the copyright and you filed the copyright, what did that give you differently than you had previously?
Well, it was the first time in the history of mankind that a flag was claimed in the now space. A flag had never been claimed in grammar in the now space. Now space is a very valuable tool. In our quantum grammar system, we study the word parse, which means we break words apart. We don't use future tense words like to, and we don't use adverbs to modify our facts, or adjectives or pronouns. We make them nouns. So we have a sequence of not being in past tense and not being in future tense, but maintaining the parameters of the grammar on paperwork, on contract, in a now tense scenario, which has never been done in the history of planet Earth. Each country, each corporation, and each person on the planet only wrote in modification grammar where they were using subjective interpretation on words because they were untrained in the mathematical interface on grammar.
And so there is actually a mathematical language that you discovered, or you...
And David.
Well, did you really discover that language, or is it something that they already knew and you just exposed it?
I have no knowledge of that because I don't know what other people know. So I can't answer that question. What I do know is we were the ones to publish it. We found it in a draft, and then I brought the now tense scenario to David, and we formed our partnership, and then it blossomed from there.
And what was the purpose of taking that on and actually correcting everything in the Parse syntax grammar?
Well, it gives closure on facts, and it does away with subjective interpretation, which gives fairness on the playing field in contract. So people can't argue about words, they know the terms, and they know the performances that need to be done, and upon those performances, now duties can be dealt out of accountability if need be.
So then you took the authorization and the copyright of the flag.
Yes.
At what point did you then take a next step and say, I'm now going to do something with this flag?
I walked into the U.S. Pentagon and leased them the flag.
What did they say at the U.S.
Thank
Pentagon?
you. You're the only citizen that cared and even knew about this. We didn't even know ourselves. Thank you. Thank you, Russell. Thank you, David. We didn't know.
That's powerful. So Russell, you've created the quantum banking system. When did you create that?
The quantum banking system was created in 2001, and it was filed at the World Bank and the International Monetary System in 2002, in December of 2002. The system itself was based on hard asset, and it was a much different concept because it tied the autonomy of sovereignty to allow different concepts of wealth to flourish within the paradigm brought by the people, not by the banks. So I found the International Monetary Fund's charters to be fraudulent, again modifying their verbs with adverbs, modifying their facts with adjectives and adverbs. And I sued based upon and rewrote the construct for a global-monetary-fund which backdropped the insurance policies off of corporate structures for drawing rights. Because the IMF was the holder, the International Monetary Fund was the holder of these bankruptcy notes holding nations into servitude through what they call the International Bank of Settlements, which is an adjective, pronoun, adverb, verb scenario, creating a fraudulent enforcement tool against the citizens of the world who were yoked into these fraudulent debts by their elected officials. So I did away with that concept to never allow a nation or a state to flourish in financial peril where they had to borrow money. Instead, we used the wealth of that nation, and I became very gifted in metallurgy, and we can demonstrate on most ground matter, dirt, copious amounts of wealth, but we don't have to mine the world.
This talks about the monoatomics in your knowledge.
Well,
of,
the unstable matter, right?
Okay.
Because so there's a difference between monoatomics. That's a different process. What this is talking about unstable matter and stabilizing matter. Financial tools that countries have, no matter what their ground is, we can take the wealth out of and demonstrate it off the algae, off the plants,
so we don't have to mine the world for gold and metal to backstop countries or backstop these banks. So
that is correct. And so what I did is I underwrote what they call, because banks are controlled by insurance policies, by the underwriters. And so I did away with and put a new concept of seigniorage for toll on that. And so it dealt with the female and male aspect of manufacturing wealth for harvest.
So there's an actual synergy to that.
Yes, because a man such as myself can only do so much, right? Because I can't self-copulate to grow anything. So I brought the female energy aspect into the takeover of the World Bank and the IMF from a position of balance, whereas the leaders of the world before came only from a male position.
This is so important.
Correct.
This is so vital.
And so when I was at the Vatican, I asked them, well, how you guys generating commerce, man-to-man style? They didn't like that. Right, I didn't like that. So I brought the female energy into that and I balanced that equation.
Did they recognize that you did that?
Oh, scared them to death.
Did they do when that happened?
They took off running.
Physically?
Physically.
Where?
Cardinals, whatever cathedral. So when I brought the female function into the banking system, and we see all these fake people around the world telling us that they have a new quantum financial system, they have a new this, they knew that. They did not do the homework on what it takes to manufacture and grow wealth, because it's an X and Y chromosome that is the manufacturers of life. So as they attempt to bring commerce to the general public will shun that away, because it's not brought from a pure masculine, feminine position. Mm-hmm. And I took the loophole of rights of what they had created in the chemical weddings. They would call them alchemical wedding concepts. And I put them into play so that the female energy sparked it, but it was not needed again. Because males are more secure, because there's a lot of negative energy out here that would hold the female energy back, hold the female energy down through scaring people. And so this was a occurring thing as I brought that female energy forward. We saw that fear factor of specifically the Jesuit order attack that certain, not physically but psychologically, and approach that entity. And so as it pushed me forward and vacated the estate, the World Bank and the IMF families, that was the main thrust of conversation on how I did that. Yeah. Because they had never seen someone actually manufacture a whole banking system on a global level from a masculine and feminine function.
From the joinder of
that.
Of what would be one at that point, not a dominant.
It was completeness.
Okay.
Because there was a balance of neutrality of both yin and yang, right? And without that, I could not give that to the world. But I gave it to the world that which separates me from all these posers out here that say they're bringing wealth to the system, but don't comprehend where they're at in space, to know that if you're just a female bringing it forward,
That wouldn't work either.
it does not work either.
Has
That
to
is
be
correct.
The balance.
Must be a balance in life. Everything is on a balance scale. We're just the harmonics resonance of that balance scale.
Yes.
And so that's where the neutrality and the now space comes into place, to know what that is, to stay within that function, and to nurture something to participate with that. Well, society is changing, and it's looking for solutions, different solutions. I just have a solution on banking. But I step out of the way when you join my system and let others create that for their dynasty, for their castle. I have a guideline that keeps them safe away from that peril of the old dynasty that's been pierced and is no longer in function. Which means the 13 families don't have a foothold to be a participant over in someone else who would choose to join the banking construct. So it's a much different underwriting on the quantum system.
So what is the surety that is underwriting that system?
The surety is knowledge and contracts that have been in place. They've been placed strategically around the world to safeguard not only the tenants that would come in usury of the quantum system, but also the system itself against the very thing that used to be. As the banking families, as fiction damages fiction and fiction destroys fiction, that is a paradigm that is no longer in the manifesting generations of the quantum system.
So the quantum system that you've created will go forward in time in this balance.
Will go forward in the vacuum. There's no such thing as time.
Okay.
In the vacuum of the space, both scalar and magnetic flux.
Is that all still in the now space?
Everything is in the now space, correct. Whereas the old dynasties that are not only function in past tense and future tense. So where is their statement for a function now?
Do they realize that they don't have the capacity to function?
Yes.
So
this
how?
is why they spin up people, bad actors around the world, and give them cover to try to downplay their shortcomings.
So now that they have that closure from you, what have they done, and what did they do when you showed them that the balance had been made?
The first thing that happened was when it was exposed to my ex-business partner, David -Colin Miller. He physically came at me and was after the female, and we got in a fist fight. We had undercover agents from the fumbling, bumbling idiots there, and they witnessed the fight. And it was a brutal fight. Right? It's okay to fight. There's a thing called tough love. Right?
So you fought them, or you fought David Wynn Miller?
But David came because he was man-to-man style.
He was technically sold out to that system.
Who he didn't know. Under lack of knowledge, he was disqualified from function. Therefore, his ties to the Rothschilds could not come forward and be in position.
What does disqualified really mean? What do you
It
mean?
means that he was with the void of capacity to do anything about it. He could not authorize contract in banking. He was neutered. When this happened, the NSA, the National Security Agency, the Department of Defense, pronoun adverb verb, and the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, pulled me off the street to have a conversation about what the ramifications of the dynamic of a male and female energy to create commerce meant for the banking constituents around the world.
And what did you tell them?
They told me that, number one, I run the world of banking, flat out. Good luck keeping it. We're all going to try to steal it from you, which we've seen many tries, which are bleak at best when you actually know what's been done for the people. It's beyond my capacity to stop at this point because I've given so much to the world. I've tried to give even more. This film hopefully gives people the education that they need to come to their own conclusions about what's been done. That was a lot of sacrifice. I sacrificed everything I loved. And yet people, unbeknownst, have no clue what that means. How could they? They've never walked a day in my shoes. They never went down those doors to actually put a commerce in place that will financially secure generations to come. They have no position to throw stones at me. And yet they do on a constant level. It's just a lack of knowledge, fear, places that they have not been, doors that they've not walked through, doors that I had the courage to walk through. I had the knowledge to walk through. And I'll never forget the day that they kept my ex-business partner, David-Win-Colin-Miller, out of a room. And I had to go further at the Vatican into a different space. And they said, David, you don't have the knowledge to go through that door. And this is where I looked at David, I was like, oh man, what am I getting myself into? Because now I'm leaving.
You're going it alone.
Going it alone. Mm-hmm. I went into that space and contracted the way I did to control all militaries and banks on planet Earth based upon knowledge, based upon demonstration of performance, answering hundreds and hundreds of questions from many cardinals, from many walks of life who I don't know, from sitting down with the Jesuits, to having conversations with Opus Dei, the different groups around the world who were engaged in games against we the people, who I don't like. This was a real character builder. And they damn well know what was said, what was done.
Can you share that? What happened when you walked through that door, alone?
They were in total surrender.
So they stood down?
Yes.
Did they stand down because you signed through a stamp? Or did they stand down because they recognized your authorization?
They knew the authorization.
And what did that mean to them in that setting?
They had never seen such a thing. No one had ever come through and said, hey, Michelangelo was wrong on his mathematical sequences in setting up the square here. No one had ever done that. No one had ever gone in and explained to him the mathematical sequences of what should have been performed when moving light energy and harmonics through time and space, or through space.
And when you described that to them, how did they react?
They called me many names, many titles of falsities and fables. I think about that sometimes. Some of those cardinals, the faces, the nuns, what they said. It was very, I did not want to be controlled by that spoken word of spell that they were trying to say.
But you ultimately broke the spell. You broke the spell casting on Earth.
I did, and it was, but they had a lot of names for me because I did it. Some good, some bad, some indifferent. But
well, sometimes they say resistance doesn't give up easily, does it?
No, we see the fight at all level. We see how they've, I don't get into theology because that's a man-made concepts. And some of the things that I got to learn at the Vatican was how they keep those man-made concepts going for war and for strife, for theft, for money. I don't concur with any of that. Because I feel the world is full of abundance. I feel that none of us are slaves, that we're all sovereign. We just have to learn how to communicate and put our needs on the table and then be able to manifest that need to better our lives.
So now that you brought forward the masculine and the feminine into perfect balance, mm-hmm. and you went into the venue of the Vatican to give them closure and correct them, mm-hmm. what happened next in the IMF?
Well, they just took me in to meet the bank presidents wherever I wanted to go. You know, it was total surrender.
What did they say to you?
Well, it's what I said to them. They would ask me a question, and I said, look, how much did you pay for your college education? Is it my job to educate you? I'm out of here. Interpol, CIA, everybody watched the meetings, fumbling by my idiots. They've all commented to me, hey, you get up and tell bank presidents you don't have the education to sit in front of me. And they all had my bank charters out. And they were all looking at them saying that this is wonderful work. How did you do this?
Did they know the grammar?
They knew the grammar, yes. They know the math interface on grammar. I could go from German to English and there's no deviation in sentence structure.
But did they know it?
They do now.
They were given closure and then they had to learn it?
I would just show up and they would take me to meet bank presidents. Like I said, it was total surrender.
So, since it was surrender, how can they still stay functioning?
Off the ignorance of the people and off of the ignorance of the militaries of the world. The militaries of the world work for the post office, and I'm the Postmaster-General of those militaries. I have not been back there. I'm busy educating security teams around me and apparatuses around me so that we can go in there and we can negotiate and find out what their needs are to stop these foolish wars. Go back in and build utopias in locations that have been blown to smithereens. If there's a supposed magical army, what is their condition of mind of leadership to allow that to happen?
Well, the argument would be that they are conditioning the people for the ultimate cleanup. But didn't you already clean it up?
What if they're the problem? Right? That is the problem. Because you can only be in the now space. So you have to clean it up now. You have to be accountable now for your actions, not in the future. You have to do the correct thing when no one's looking, now. Not in the past, and not in the future. Because you can only be in the now.
So you, as the Postmaster General, speaking to the militaries of the world, what's the hierarchy of how this works out in the world?
So, say you're a German citizen and you want to go into the military in Germany. You have to go to the post office first and get your military registration number. Same function holds true for each country in the world. And it's about, that is tied directly to your birth certificate. Right? So it's a sub-account off your birth certificate under an underwriting for assurance because they have to underwrite you to go into your respective branch. And I've done away with this because there is no one smart enough to go to war. If they were smart enough, they would have their communication lines open because any warrior will tell you, before you go into a mission, you must know the parameters of what's around you. You must know what's upstream and downstream. You must have evac plans backwards and frontwards, contingency plans to move yourself so that you can accomplish the mission. But when the mission is based upon a fairy tale, a lie, president, prime ministers, this is just not true. Because the Universal Postal Union lost its credentialing to join that post office's military and send people to war in 2001.
By you?
By me. And they damn well know, and they damn well sat in the meetings and had the conversations with me on the ramifications, and their words to me are, the people are stupid, Russell.
That doesn't bode well for the world.
Doesn't bode well for the world. I've done what I can to educate, and there are many good people within the quantum grammar system now. There's a lot of negativity out here, sure, but that weeds itself in the space of the correctness. It's about being correct and honest. The easiest person to fool is yourself. I have not fooled myself. I've done what I've said. The powers that you think to be know correctly who I am. And, you know, we're going to let the space be the judge of everything in the now space.
So the people recognize in their fiction world, as you call it, that there's a president and a government functioning. And some talk about the Republic coming back. How do you feel about the Republic?
There's no guidelines. There's no rule. The guidelines, the Constitution, it just ended in 1999. No one reauthorized the Continental government. No one with a claim of the life, because they're all in usury. They're trying to start systems in usury with functions that they don't comprehend the pecking order on a global meritocracy level. This is what I have done, is set up the quantum system so that it goes from territory to territory, community to community, on a now space scenario. Globally. Galactically, when we pull in my Galactic Postal Corporation concepts that have been put into place. I keep the world in Earth space banking because that's where y'all are. So because the citizens only know one thing: credit, debt, credit, debt, credit, debt. I'm a slave, I'm a slave, I'm a slave. I got to strive, I got to strive. I'm trying to get... We need to pull that off the people. And this is where the quantum system and the education comes into place, so that there's a monetary value in place for we the people, to where we're not bound, to where we can now create our own economies, our own markets, our own trade terms. And this is where the flag comes into place to allow tenants to do that.
So you think that we would never be able to return to an old, what I'll call now, a broken feudal system?
It is not possible.
From this point forward, or from 1999 forward, technically, your system has been in play as the corrected system on planet Earth.
Yes.
Has anyone ever come to you and said, I now want to join you from those families? Or
Oh, yeah, oh, absolutely, yes.
what happened?
I cannot allow certain terms to come through the paradigm because it could damage the citizens.
So you
I have to be-
refuse them?
Yes, I have to be selective on how you would let... Would you let a criminal into your bank to run the vault?
No.
Has anything in history told you anything different than the condition of mind of those who you think are in power? That they have any flip of a switch to do something kind for you?
Well, it's not been loving throughout time.
It's not been loving.
What's been missing throughout time?
Love.
But you talked about
Forgiveness.
the three and the four coming together, the male and the female
Oh, yeah.
aspect.
Oh, for sure.
Why is it that throughout time that never corrected or self-corrected or...
Because one side of dominance always portrayed domination. And a male would always stay in charge, or a female would always stay in charge. They never could find communication between them to set terms that are equitable for both the energies.
That's a powerful statement in time, in this now space.
Oh, in space, it is the only thing that one thinks about when you're a leader.
So Russell, you have established yourself as the global authority on banking with the proper authorizations on banking.
Yeah, Comptroller of the global currencies based on knowledge of what it takes to set up a currency.
And this is established by a periodic table and a flag, is that correct?
Yes, it has many tentacles of authorizations because the meritocracy of setting up commercial tools is so massive in scope, from cyberspace and digital to tangible warehousing.
So you're aware of AI technology today. How does that factor into the disruption of a system that you've created? Can it be looked at as something that could be out of control in the future to interrupt that?
The nice thing about AI is it can be shut down. So that is a nice thing. There are tools and people in place that if it gets out of control, can shut that down. So I'm not so concerned about AI. What I am concerned about is the scoping of people's minds and the invasion into our bodies to trespass and create choices that we think we're making, and yet someone else is triggering the mitochondrial system to allow things to happen.
So what you're referring to is, for example, the 5G and how the 5G may be controlling what you call the subspace around us, which could imprint people's thought patterns or their harmonics and shift those out of balance.
This is correct.
Russell, you hold many titles in the world, and with the quantum banking world, what are your titles within the quantum banking world?
Well, I have many titles within the quantum banking world. Titles are job positions. So the job positions that I have, number one, Comptroller of the global currencies, and that, with punctuation, of course. And
Hyphens and colons, to be exact.
Yes. And that function deals with the mechanics of how monetary systems are brought to the forefront, because I am the world authority on the mechanics of how that actually happens, because everything would have to be registered through my paradigm of what I've set up in the now space, because I'm the creator of the quantum system in the now space, whereas the banking from other corporations are set up in future tense and past tense connotation and syntax, as well as part of my job task as Comptroller of the global currencies is to look at the hallmarking on specific warehousing on goods, make sure they meet the criteria of the quantum grammar system. And
Such as what? Give us
would
an
be
example.
like the hallmarking, right? The hallmarking has to be done in such a style of font for communication that it's correct. And so these are terms and things that I've set up through when I disqualified the International Bureau of Weights and Measures. These were some of the criterias that I implemented into the matrix to give the quantum system a foothold on copy hold for the mechanics of hallmarking metals.
Is this part of the safeguarding of that system?
This is part of the safeguarding of that system. So if a metal was wanted to be put on POSIT within the system, that's outside, because our quantum system is all self-grown and self-made metals. So, but if someone, an entity, corporation, wanted to bring metals in, there's criterias and functions that are in place to safeguard the integrity not only of the customer coming into the bank, but the integrity of the bank and the goods themselves.
Now, the bank is a global bank, is that correct?
Yeah, it is a global bank because I hold the copyrights and the titles for stewardship of planet Earth in the now space, which means I've syntaxed the land titles at the Universal Postal Union, found them to be 100% fraud, and implemented a new land title for claim, for load, and dry dock vesseling, lading and unlading of breaking bulk on vessels. That is within the construct of the quantum banking system.
So where you would actually function,
I-
where it would be
Anywhere in the
laid down.
Anywhere on planet Earth.
So why would you need to have titling different if that were the case?
Because the titles were written in adverb verb and didn't say anything, and there was actually no claim on the land ever in the history of planet Earth. And I was the first person to file title for now space control of land matter. In 2018, I was brought in for a oil family, gas family, metals family out of Afghanistan. And at the table were representatives from Turkey, Syria, and Afghanistan, and families who had controlling interests of land in Afghanistan, as well as Afghani generals and generals from different Middle Eastern countries, as well as the U.S. military. And the first thing that was asked to me by the generals from Afghanistan is, what are you going to do if we allow this system, because they wanted me to give them technology for lithium battery tech for brining salts. And I said, well, the first thing I'm going to have to do is grant you authorization to be on my land. And the generals all jumped up, what the? And I'm like, yeah, you're on my land. And they were yelling, we're going to stick a gun in your face. And I'm like, hey, look, it's not about guns and clubs, it's about contract. And the financiers behind the generals stood up and said, no, this man is correct. We have to get authorization to be in the now space on the land, because they had done their homework. And the contracts that I have with them were in Farsi, Arabic, and English, and they lost no deviation in our sentence structure. So they concurred with that they, in Afghanistan, had no land claim because it was all written in modification grammar. It said nothing.
Russell, what is the value of the now space grammar? And can you explain how correct communication parse syntax grammar works on contract and how it fixes current contracts based on subjective interpretation, past and future tenses?
So now space grammar is neither in past tense form or future tense connotation. So when we come into the negotiation rooms around planet Earth, the neutral courtrooms, the neutral banks, to negotiate contract, we don't have subjective interpretation where people can argue about words. Courts no longer have the ability to function in Admiralty to dictate to the citizens of the world terms in which they're going to comply with contract. It is a flip giving the sovereignty and the autonomousness to the citizens to now control their now space and direct the public servants to the terms in which they comply with and they honor. Courts can't try a fact. It only can try the condition of mind. Therefore, the facts of what's being done or has been done in a courtroom cannot be looked at. Only the condition of mind which created the fact. This is the value of the prepositional phrase, to preset the fact, so that now we can have the facts which don't have feelings. The facts now can be set aside. And now we can ask the tough questions that need to be asked. Why were these facts conveyed? Or why were they not conveyed? What was the volition and the condition of mind to create these facts which caused performances and consequences that caused damage against our fellow mankind? So this is the value of the now space quantum grammar as we take the control mechanism out of a subjective interpretation of a courtroom, out of the subjective interpretation of an opinion by a court, to now let the facts stand, to put the condition of mind on why the facts were conveyed. This is a self-governing tool to now weed out bad thinkers who conveyed bad concepts towards the people out of our world.
Why hasn't this tool been brought forward sooner? Were you the first to discover it?
We were the first to present. I was the first to take it through the judicial systems, yes. And so, as first in line, first in time, you've got to comprehend, from my perspective, the world was not ready, right? The world was so being spun up by their fake ideologies of 9/11, their fake ideologies of run to war first without thinking and finding facts. There was false leaders leading the bandwagon on that. There was a social engineering that was occurring on a global level, very difficult for one guy to get in the way of, because the bombardment was so massive, couldn't compete with the brainwashing of society. So as we watch what is not being done, but what's being done to society, you see influencers from many walks of life being held accountable to the court systems because they're not sovereign when they walk in. They hire attorneys and they're engaged in all kinds of usuries of corporate meritocracy that they've never taken the time to study. The courts know this. They yoke the burden upon them, and the courts function as a collection agency against the people, because the influencers now come out of the courtroom saying, I'm in debt, if you want to see us going, give us some money. And now they give them the money. And so now the influencer now becomes a collection agency for the judicial system. And so the grammar would stop that once people know how to contract for their corporate entities, drop out of their subjective interpretation about words that did or did not have meaning at the time based upon no closure by the courts, because the first rule of a court is to make sure everybody comprehends what's going on. When these influencers come to court, they are not sovereigns, right? They're not. They don't have a flag to run behind. They have their attorneys who are engaged as a friend of the court, in usury with the court, to now run a federal court of appeals where the prosecuting attorney signs the stamp, the defendant's attorney signs the stamp, and the clerk signs the stamp. A 3-judge court of appeals gets run at them, right? They don't tell this claimant who now, or this defendant or whatever they call them, who now leaves the courtroom, they don't tell them you just ran into an appeals court, but we're not going to tell you, spend more money, raise more money from the people, and now go back in, even though we had ran a 3-judge court of appeals at you because everybody signed the stamp except for you because you're the slave. And now it's just a massive harvest against the people who buy into that influencer and pay that influencer funds to now pay the court. So it's the courtrooms function as a collection agency. They figured out a way to not only trick people to come in, but to trick people to sponsor people that have been in and that are being harvested. This is a total farce against the citizens of the world.
And you corrected this.
I've corrected this, yes.
Now, if someone were to walk into a courtroom using the parse syntax
courts are
grammar,
closed. You can't even get to court. Martial law. Civil servants is over. That phraseology, thinking that there is a civil employee in front of you, a civilian sector, trying to tell you what you can and can't do with your life, this is a fable.
Why are courts closed?
Because it's martial law.
Did you establish martial law?
I established martial law on December 12th, 2004. But global martial law has been running for quite some time. As a fact, I established it in 2004 at the Pentagon. Don't worry, they already all know. They were all at the trials.
Why don't we see it?
How courts are closed is the U.S. Post Office, when they came out of bankruptcy in 1999 and they vacated the position of president in the 2000 election, the United States Post Office violated Title 39, Section 101, subsection A and subsection B, which means they vacated the position of a president and they vacated the Constitution, which were the terms of the bankruptcy. So the Post Office no longer had authorization to do what? Authorize the Department of Commerce, the U.S. Treasury, to what? To coin money, to convey and contract anywhere on the planet. So the clerk of courts, when you go there, you're shipping yourself through a dead instrument called your driver's license or your passport, which clears you into the foreign vessel in dry dock. And the Department of Transportation lost its authorization to allow that function to happen. So it's closed to closed to closed. And the unsuspecting society, the unsuspecting citizens, walk in thinking that they're going to get some kind of fair play, fair deal from a dead entity.
Yet it still continues. I mean, people continue to function in doing that.
Because the people lack closure on the terms of the bankruptcy, because the people lack closure on the terms of where they're at in time and space, they're lost. And they're being spun up by these influencers who keep the status quo concepts of these fake presidential elections going and these fake senators and fake governor elections going, when the real problem is, and they can't figure it out for some unknown reason, there are no terms to elect a governor. There are no terms to elect a senator. There are no terms to elect a president.
So all the voting,
Where's their flag to set the terms to make that function happen? They don't have any state flags anymore because they're all under martial law. They don't have any government flags anymore because I own the flags. So how are they going to, pray tell, how are they going to elect a leader that's fair for the people?
So voting fraud isn't even an issue on the table.
The whole thing's fraud. The whole construct is fraud. There is not 1 ounce of correctness in it. Not one.
So it's a psyop on top of a psyop on top of a psyop.
It is a brainwashing of our minds to think that there's an actual president. It is a brainwashing of our minds to think that there's an actual governor, when the hieroglyphics tell a different story and the flags tell a different condition of state.
Now, when you say the hieroglyphics tell a different story, what does that mean?
That is the spire on top of the flag standards. That's a symbol. It's a hieroglyphic symbol. That means war. During times of war, contract is suspended, which means there are no contract rights.
So going back to the influencer just for a minute, what does the word influencer mean in parse syntax grammar?
No contract. Because in to a word means no. Fluence means that information or knowledge is moving through something. So there's no knowledge moving.
You're pointing out that influencers are not given full closure, so therefore they don't even know what they're doing out there, and others are responding to that. how would that be corrected positively for our world today?
Not so much that what they're saying is wrong. It's just they don't have the facts correct to deliver the message. Because their message would be different. They wouldn't be talking about governor races. They wouldn't be talking about senator races. That's tomfoolery. Something
they
that
would
just does
have
not...
closure that there's something else.
They would be
that's been
talking about
corrected.
the new paradigm for networking to backdrop the credit and debit system away from the people.
So when these people are harvested in court and then unwittingly go out and ask for help from their supporters, they are technically seen by whom as no fluencers?
By those of us who know what grammar is. There's more and more of us that are catching on. There's more citizens out here that are catching on to the grammar scam. As soon as they catch on to the grammar scam and they reprogram their usury tentacles, voila. Some of the success that we're seeing by some of the sovereigns that have attended the workshops in the banking paradigm of their space is they're coming into the banks, the fiction banks, and resetting up their tentacle usuries with that bank as a postmaster and giving their performance contracts to the bank for the terms that they so choose for their contracts, which I'm not a part of what they're setting up, right? They're setting up their own terms. Some terms vary between postmaster to postmaster based upon their specific needs, based upon the usury tentacles that they have with the bank, and based upon the volition of setting up fairness for the world. Because everyone that is using that is after a position of fairness. Right? It's okay to allow a fiction bank who provides a service to you fees. So what I'm hearing is that they're allowing that to be set up, and they're getting a lot of cooperation from the banks to comply with this position of fairness in this crazy world of banking that's out here now.
And do they have that position because they know your authorization?
They have the credentialing on their claim of the life to set up that paradigm for themselves. When the claimants and sovereigns and postmasters come in and use the system of the quantum system, they're not going in and stealing money from the bank, right? They're not giving them commands that, hey, you're giving me all this money or else.
Well, technically, after what you said, there's no money in the banks.
There is no money in the banks.
There's nothing there.
But they're stuck under usury of goods that they've agreed to put there. So under the usury, what they're not going in is stealing from a bank. We don't have theft within the quantum system because it's accountability. They're not taking out big loans and then thinking that they're getting out of a loan. They're not going in and taking mortgages and borrowing money on a bank, on a mortgage note, and then thinking they're getting out of a mortgage. This is a fallacy because there's usury and tentacles of tangible goods that are being exchanged on good faith. They're not going into the bank and taking over. They're going in and they're directing the servants at the bank to function as a fiduciary for them as the sovereign. So it's a different paradigm because the fiduciary is the bankrupt entity. And the sovereign claimant, postmaster, comes in as the controlling factor to direct the servants who work at the bank as a fiduciary to the terms which they choose for their accounts. The fiction world calls them accounts, but AC as a prefix to a word means no, so no count. So we call them counts. Right, so all these words, when you go to a bank, you go to a bank and you do a deposit, but the prefix DE means to separate from your deposit or your position. And then the bank turns around and hands you a receipt, but the prefix RE means no, so they give you nothing back. So you've separated yourself from your position by a deposit, and now the bank's giving you no proof that you left any deposit there. And this allows third parties to now access to your accounts because you have no proof that you control your value that you placed in or your goods that you placed into that account. We're not trying to steal that right away from someone who is trying to provide a service for it.
But the banks themselves recognize when this comes through.
Yes,
They
I
know
control
that.
all banks on planet Earth. This is not a fable. This is truth. This is correctness. I'm not a secret to the banks. I'm not a secret to the banking former dynasties that are no longer within the paradigm. I'm a secret to the general public.
Why do you think that is?
Because they've done everything they can to thwart every transaction and everything that I've done for the last 28 years that I've been doing this.
And if they didn't, if they stopped and corrected tomorrow, what would happen on planet Earth? Literally, what would take place?
First of all, the accountability level is not upon the government at that point. The accountability level is on the people. So now people are going to have to be honest with themselves, live within their means, and not go outside the paradigm of the lust, vanity, and greed that drives so many. At the same time, it downsizes governments on a global level, transitions us off a tax-based market where there are no taxes but a consumption tax of 10%. That 10% is used to fund the country's infrastructures. Then allows free venture capitalists now to set up their own terms to go to marketplace, to put their creative concepts into manufacturing capacity without red tape to benefit our fellow mankind. That is on the citizens to do, not me. I've already given my technology to the world to use. I've already given the platform that is safe and neutral during spaces of war. So the citizens at that point step forward. The citizens create their paradigm within the tentacle of the global construct to now give them the necessary tools to create autonomy and sovereignty for the rates and terms which they choose to use on their contracts.
If the world were to collapse tomorrow, the world economy was to collapse tomorrow, if everything was to end tomorrow, how would this system go into play, literally, that would safeguard the world, or could it? What system would immediately take its place?
Well, it would be under a directive global martial law position if you saw the world economies collapse in a split second. So there would be much chaos. But out of that chaos will come accountability, because as that happens, the education is getting in place for the security teams, the military members around the world, to come to a conclusion about correctness. You can't force a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So you cannot force people into a conditioned state of thinking. And that's some of the problem that we have out here with the geoengineering that is occurring, is that we are being tricked into thinking that we're making a choice, and that choice is being directed by the influences of others. So this is what we want to combat and fight and stop from invading the privacy of our lives. You know, privacy is a very valuable tool for mankind. And we must really put up safeguards to buffer outside forces to come into our households. Because in your households, you make choices. And those choices are between you and your loved ones, which then affect the direction of your household. These are things that are being bombarded on a daily level that need to come off the yoke of the people, because the power is in the household. The power is in each in sovereign that participates with that niche of love and community with their family. So that is put back on the forefront, and then the terms come from out from within.
So Russell, you have safeguarded some of the technologies that you have discovered and found to be in the world. Why have you withheld some of it?
Well, you can't give an uneducated population technology because, number one, they use it against each other, and their volition is to steal. Sad, but true. So I have found within the quantum grammar community that so many have been spun up worldwide of theft of a concept that they just weren't in the creative position on. Right? They did not create the quantum system. They did not create the quantum now-space grammar. Right? The quantum grammar was created by David-Wynne Miller and Russell-J. Gould, who brought the now space to David, which we formed a pact and a partnership. We had held shareholder meetings on terms that none of these actors around the world, who if I gave technology out there to the general public, would run with. And so I have been holding technology back, specific in banking, specific on negotiation of treaties between peace, between nations, between functions, between corporations, for this volition of safeguarding something that was
that much sacrifice and love and tears and pain was put into by me and others who was the foundation's aid behind that, those people have sacrificed many and much. And when you see what's happening to the world of people trying to steal the concepts and being gaslit by the fiction to continue to steal and wrong lead people, this is why I've held back technology.
Will you release it?
I will give the technology to the people in the quantum banking system that I have when the world is ready to receive it.
Thank you. What if the world were ready now for that technology?
So are all the bad guys, are they all dead?
Would they have to be dead to have it come forward?
They would have to be sequestered in a position where they can't influence or steal from the people. So yes.
How would you know all the bad guys? How would you ever identify on Earth?
Well, you really can't. But the system is built in a way that you could not steal from the system because it self-governs itself if you get the negative players out of the way that control the media airways to allow that self-cleaning to happen.
Do you see that coming in the future?
Oh, yeah, in the now space, yes, I see it.
Yes,
Yeah,
in the now space.
Yeah, oh yes. I would not be here. I would not be teaching the world, and I would not be on my mission to help mankind and to have mankind help me, right? It helps me by learning.
What have
And
you
I
learned from mankind?
I learned that a lot of good people care. They don't know who to point the finger at, but we need to point it from within first and judge ourselves before we judge others.
What is your mission?
My mission is to share quantum grammar with the world, the quantum banking system with the world, and leave the world a better place so that we don't have to financially struggle against debt and credit.
Russell, you're an extraordinary individual, and some call you perhaps the greatest patriot ever in America. How do you see yourself as that man?
Oh, Winifred, I've been through a lot. I've been through a lot of trials and tribulations where I've had to sacrifice all that I am. The humility, the humbleness, the meekness, the learning about myself. I had to forgive myself first before I could forgive others. And being able to forgive others when they create harm on you. And once I learned how to do that, the world opened up to me. I was no longer walking around angry for being starved down or beat up. I could forgive them. They have families, they're following orders. The orders are fraudulent orders, but I comprehend the storyline that people are trying to keep secure, because this storyline puts a lot of people that have influenced the world under a lot of death and a lot of carnage on fellow mankind. And for my story to get out there and people to see the authenticity of who I am. But if they go to my local community, they'll know that I stood up against tyrants at all times. They may not have comprehended why I was doing it. How could they? I was learning about it myself. I was learning how to give. I was learning how to sacrifice. I was learning how to love. And the world that sees these other people pop up and say they're me, they've never been through those trials. They did not create anything. In fact, they have hijacked my capacity to help the world. It's not fair to the world. So many people spun up in so many different concepts around patriotism, sovereignty, who have never been in the fight for themselves. If you've not done it from within, how can you bring it to the outside world? I ask myself this as I see concepts of state nationals, when I know that the banking world says 2-year maritime salvage, the states were supposed to have their own commerce, right? Why didn't the states in '99 authorize a new Congress for their state Congresses? Why didn't they put up new protocols for their National Guards? Why did they not set up new state representatives and protocols and correct grammar? Why did they all fail? And then how can they sit back and let people in 2020 or 2021 claim to be a state national on a system that is no longer valid? And that the good people that care and think that they're doing something for their own sovereignty are being spun up and set up as cannon fodder in a martial law position. It's not fair to the people. And shame on the governments for not publishing and putting the videos of me in those locations, from the Vatican to the World Bank to the United Nations. There's thousands and thousands of hours of documented film with me going toe-to-toe with those who have held society back. It's unfortunate that every place that I went, they had all the guns and clubs. They had all the security. They had all the strength. But Russell-J. Gould has courage and charisma. And I will walk through the doors of any house on the planet, and I will show a paradigm that frees mankind, regardless of who tries to yoke it, regardless of who tries to hold back the concept of open communications with correct communication, parsing, syntax, grammar, who try to hold my story back, who hide the court-martialings of the admirals and generals and master sergeants and colonels, and my goodness, the list goes on and on by the Pentagon. They know what's up, right? Correct. It's correct. So someday, when the world gets a chance to watch that, I hope they look back at this film and they say, you know, Russell looked pretty wild in that spot. Look, I was not nice to the federal governments of the world. I called them a lot of names.
You called them out.
Called them out. U.S. Secret Service said, you know, Russell, why do you call us pussy motherfuckers all the time? I said, it's not me talking. It's the millions behind me that don't have the knowledge to stand in front of you and tell you what you're doing and who you're safeguarding is a lie. And that lie, it damages the world, which damages the American people, because the American people are left holding the bag of the consequences and choices by fake leaders who you keep safe from the people. And I hope I speak on their behalf to call you that. I hope I have the honor to speak on behalf of the people to tell you that.
They'd also call you courageous. Do you see yourself as courageous?
Yeah, people follow courage. I do.
What do you see? Who would be courageous in your eyes?
Well, I haven't seen a whole lot of courageousness. There are people speaking out, but they're still holding on to a dead system. It's painful to watch. There are good people being damaged that are networking, thinking that they have a solution, going into closed judicial systems worldwide. Not only did I shut it down, I am the only acting citizen in the history of mankind to take out an acting world court at The Hague and become chief judge, an acting judicial system in the United States judicial system, and an acting judicial system for every country on planet Earth. Now think about that. With the moxie, the credentials to walk through the door and safeguard mankind. And people want to throw stones at that, and I get where you're coming from. But you're looking at it from a different perspective because you've never walked in my shoes to make the voyage and the journey, to make it count when nobody's looking.
What do you feel about our current military? Non-authorized personnel is what you're
Non-authorized generals following protocols of secret societies. They know exactly who I speak of. They know exactly what they're doing. They're dressing down. They're disarming the citizenship. They are outsourcing all of our armory to other nations to fight fraudulent wars, which undermines the national security of this country. They have foreign actors within the U.S. government in all sectors infiltrating the undermining of the security of the citizens of the former United States. They went and got themselves vaccinated by an artificial, self-generating mutant which weakens your capacity to stay in the fight. They are following fraudulent leaders at every turn. Knowingly, it has to stop.
How will it stop?
First by contract, and then by might makes right.
Are you saying that with a certain number of people becoming postmasters and joining into your system, then that change can take place?
It already has taken place. You just haven't seen it yet. But the performances are done in the now space to manufacture that.
Why haven't we seen that on the outside yet?
Because your minds aren't ready to accept it. As your minds are ready to accept a different paradigm of thinking, a different paradigm of factual concepts, and you raise your education and your vibration up to that threshold, you will see a world of happiness, a world of kindness, a world where people get along, where people fight for each other, and we separate our ideologies of division, our ideologies of religious faiths that cause division, and look at ourselves as a spiritual being from the inside out, and clean up from the inside out. And as we clean from the inside out, what will come out to the world will be beautiful.
Russell-J. Gould, Postmaster-General of Planet Earth, Comptroller of the World Banks, creator of the quantum banking system.
Yes.
Safeguarding of planet Earth, technically, and beyond. We haven't gotten that conversation yet.
We are stuck in Earth space banking at this moment. This is a phenomenon. Yes.
Thank you for all you've done, and thank you for giving this much closure on all of your technologies thus far. This conversation needs to be continued.
Oh yes. And thank your audiences and the audiences of the world for listening, and hark to these words and search them out for yourselves. Because it's really, when you see the potential of what we are as beings and the kindness that we have from within, like we'll be looking back at this going, who are them jokers? Right? We'll be looking back at it saying, you know what? We do have security for our loved ones. We do have peace in our hearts. There's nobody coming to kill us. Because
Wouldn't that
we're
be
happy.
the day?
Yeah, well, we're happy from within.
What makes you happy? Besides basketball.
Basketball is just one facet. I'm happy seeing people wake up. You know, for me, it's been a different journey. You got to comprehend, in 1999, nobody cared. It wasn't till the last about 4 years, 5 years, that people started caring about what was happening out here. They didn't comprehend the storyline because they've been given a false narrative. But I've seen good people starting to rally, ask good questions. I'm hearing conversations I've never thought I'd hear, where people are like, hey, questioning. It's okay to question. It's okay to do your own search. It's okay to manage your own life. It's okay to be accountable for your choices that you make. It's okay.
One man is growing old and one man is being told that his land is not his own now. He has no place called home. He must learn to be and grow and find time to feed his soul. When he learns to be alone, he will find that he is whole. Gonna break free tonight. Gonna take these chains, gonna make it through the night. Gonna break free tonight. Gonna break these chains, gonna make it to the night. Sometimes you feel so old, sometimes you never know. A world that seems so dim, can't find the light within. Feels like you just can't win when the world keeps closing in. But there's just one place to start. Remember, open heart.